Hello again, this is Kenny Fikes, host of the iKnow.Media Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity alongside empirical experience with reasoned application and analysis. Going around the horn, let's start with you, Elisa.
Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons and I'm a Montessori guide, and I'm just excited to be part of tonight's conversation and let's see where everybody falls on these topics.
How you doing, Michael?
Very well, Michael Malowski. I'm a pediatrician in Denver, Colorado, father of 7, and super excited to be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Ms. Ellis.
Hi, I'm Jayshree Ellis. People call me Jay. I am an obstetrician gynecologist. I live in Houston, and I'm really excited about today's conversation.
Great. So there are lots of themes that have been going around with us. One is that there's a change, something's happening, something's going on. And we sort of walked into this week at the end of last week when we talked about how some of us in this group had sort of forgotten or not paid that much attention to what Michael was doing on a Saturday as groups of a minority as members of a minority population. Elisa was the one who actually remembered and pulled our coattails. Now, with that said, this week, another theme is one that Michael really talked about a lot the last session or the one before, and we all agreed and gave examples wherein there can be two things present at the same time. So the article that we're going to talk about is entitled "The Anti-Semitism We Didn't See. Deshaun Jackson's Hitler Moment and Mine showed that Black Americans' experience of racism doesn't automatically sensitize us towards other forms of prejudice." And this was written by Jamel Hill, Black female. So the two things that exist at the same time in this article for me are, on one hand, it's true in terms of its basic premise that we need to be sensitive to all, just like we want people to be sensitive to us. But on the other hand, I think she's trying a little hard. I think she's running a little deep and trying to over-apologize and appease someone. Because for me and my experience as an African-American man, and I'm going to say that funny thing we say, I've been Black all my life. And I have groups of friends from home in North Carolina, from Massachusetts and Boston, from the University of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, from Oklahoma City, from Knoxville, and different places. And I can tell you that anti-Semitism is not a theme in the Black community as far as I've experienced. It just isn't. The most anti-Semitism I hear is here in Knoxville, actually, quite frankly, ever. And I'm proud to say this, I do speak up. I generally say something like, "What are you talking about? So what are you trying to say?" And here's the one phrase they always say. You know where I'm going? It's about money and negotiating. I hear white people say, "Someone tried to Jew you down."
People, I mean, that's a term people are actually using. Like, I hear about that term, but I've never actually been in front of someone saying.
Yes, I've heard a Black person say it too, but it's mainly white folks in this area. So having said that, that's my intro. And why don't you tackle this first, Michael?
So obviously there's a lot I could say about this. Been Jewish all my life, but you know, it's interesting. What you guys may not know about me, I grew up, my grandparents were the immigrants to this country. Like a lot of Jewish families, my grandparents emigrated from Eastern Europe, specifically Russia, on both sides, and left way before World War II, like, you know, probably like in the 30s, came here to America, settled. And my great-grandparents, you know, looked like me. They had yarmulkes on and they had big, long beards, and they rapidly assimilated their own children. So my grandparents and my parents raised me, and my parents were raised in completely secular Jewish non-religious homes, being pushed to you know, go to Ivy League schools and to be doctors, lawyers, and accountants. That is a stereotype that is true. Jewish mothers love that stuff. And so, because most stereotypes, you know, at least around Jewish people, there's some truth in it somewhere. So And then when I met my now wife and we decided what kind of family we wanted to raise, we went back to a much more religious, traditional, and Torah observant, Orthodox religious home, which is not how we were raised. We had to learn a lot about it ourselves. And so, I have experience in the very Orthodox community, like you see on TV with the long payas and the beards. But I grew up in the very suburban Washington, D.C., wealthy, affluent, assimilated, secular Jewish community. Guys who worked for Goldman Sachs and who were dentists and surgeons and orthopedists, right? Those were all my Jewish friends' dads.
Sure.
So when it comes to anti-Semitism, I think I mentioned this before, anti-Semitism is often described, and I know that African Americans will take issue with it, but I mean, in terms of world history, there's anti-Semitism going back all the way through the pre-Middle Ages. There's into the Crusades, and entire societies and communities of Jews were wiped out as the Crusaders moved across Europe to Jerusalem. I mean, it's been part of the lifeblood in the consciousness of a lot of Europe for centuries. So some people, like certain Jewish commenters, say it's the world's oldest prejudice, or perhaps the world's oldest bigotry. Who knows if that may or may not be true, but certainly there's a lot of documentation that it might be true. I never, as I told you guys, experienced any direct anti-Semitism growing up, never experienced any direct anti-Semitism in college. And, Kenny knows I ran in a pretty diverse circle because I was the rare Jewish kid who played Division I college basketball. That makes me, Kenny, as much as your political views make you a unicorn, in the Jewish world, I am a unicorn with sparkles and glitter because it just doesn't happen that much.
Hey, you follow Bruce Lefkowitz.
Lefkowitz.
Yes.
And Bruce Lefkowitz actually was the guy that inspired me to play at Penn because I watched him play in the tournament. Hey, Dossie. I know, amazing. Thank you, Hadassah. So Bruce Lefkowitz, if you do remember, when Penn went to the tournament that year he was a senior and they played North Carolina.
I was on that team. I played in that game.
Right, remember that game? And North Carolina's freshman star was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
J.R. Reed.
J.R. Reed. And Bruce Lefkowitz, who could not, and to this day, Bruce and I know each other. Bruce will admit, could Bruce jump over a credit card on his best day, Kenny?
No, he couldn't.
No, he could not. If Bruce Lefkowitz is listening to this podcast, we love you, Bruce. But
so let's wrap this up and get around for a minute. Let Elisa chime in on the overall sort of the macro view of this article, and then I know Jay Cherie wanted to talk about this as well, so I'll let her wrap up.
But I didn't experience anti-Semitism going up at all.
That's okay. Yeah. What do you got, Elisa?
You know what? For me growing up, I can actually remember hearing people praise Jewish people for being amazing and when it came to money, and being selfish because they weren't going to share the wealth. And I can also say, Michael, I'm going to say this. When one of the people who I encouraged to watch this podcast, they were like, well, my least favorite person is Michael because he reminds me of a New York Jew. And you had a baseball cap on. So they did not see your yarmulke. So it's not something, I will say that negative Jewish comments aren't something I hear regularly, but it is something I completely have always been aware of for my entire life. And I think that's why with the topic of Deshaun Jackson and even today with Nick Cannon's new comments, it's just so disparaging because you do hear how negative people who are being oppressed themselves will turn and treat another group of people in very similar ways. So I think it's a little sad to me.
Yeah, I think we may give, and this is what I don't like about this article. She likes to use words like trope, but we may overlay too much on the Black community based on what a few Hollywood people are doing. Because I can tell you, for me, again, my immediate reaction when I hear someone make an anti-Semitic comment, or even Mexican, is, oh my God, what must you say about me if I weren't around? Do you think I'm okay with that?
Yes.
So, Jay Cherie, what do you think?
I mean, I think that, we have to really consider what we mean when we say anti-Semitism. because much like the word racism, I think we often feel like racism is going to be like somebody comes out and like calls you a racial epithet, right? But that's not always the only thing that racism is. And I think with anti-Semitism, there's a lot that goes on or that is said that we think nothing of, right? So I grew up in New York City, and New York has a prominent Jewish population with a lot of power. I mean, and you guys heard me talk about like just the observation of Jewish holidays, right? It was such a thing in New York that I thought I was supposed to observe Jewish holidays and not have to go to school when I went to college in Philly, right? So that's how entrenched the Jewish culture was in New York City. So, you know, I never really thought anything of schoolmates who were Jewish, and, you know, I didn't think anything bad about them. But I do recall that my grandmother would always use that term. You know, if you go out there, they're going to try to Jew you down, you know, on the cost of this or the quality of that. And I never really thought about what that meant when she was, I mean, I understood what she was implying, but I didn't understand where that word came from. That right there is anti-Semitic, right? Because it's referring to a situation in which someone's going to try to take advantage of you. Someone is going to try to get more from you than they deserve to have, right? And so, and I think that many times when people refer to the Jewish culture, they do attribute to them the ability to be very good with money. But then there's that other side of it where there's a suggestion that they may not have integrity with how they do that, that if you're not careful, they're going to take advantage of you. And so I think that that's very anti-Semitic. They don't have to come out and call them a racial epithet, or they don't have to come out and say that Hitler was a great person to have made an anti-Semitic remark or have an anti-Semitic thought. And I think it's those nuances that we have to start to examine in our thought, those kind of like subconscious biases that we sometimes have and beliefs that we have about people. I think that's what we have to examine.
So I was in a meeting. Sometimes it truly is ignorance. I think Deshaun Jackson, I think it was ignorant so many times, just like we're aware of Trump supporters and their ignorance. They just repost memes and repeat things that they hear, and they have no idea because they already have a sense of something. I would never make an excuse for Deshaun Jackson. I think it was just stupid and ignorant. I don't know what he really feels, but the judgment of someone who would want to attribute anything to Adolf Hitler is kind of questionable, right? Beyond questionable. I was in a meeting once in Oklahoma City, a pre-construction meeting, and the guy that I can tell you with my life is not a racist or anti-Semitic, but he had never really traveled much outside of Oklahoma, went to community college there, and he was good and smart in the construction industry, but he didn't know anything about other people. Like, he had never been to New York City, that kind of stuff. We were in a pre-construction meeting, and he was trying to motivate people about building things to last in like an industrial complex. And he started referring to Hitler and saying how this guy built this amazing machine and all these things. And when I could feel that he was almost giving Hitler serious kudos, I was kind of going, hey, like, stop, like, don't do that. And I explained it to him later, and he was like, oh my God, really? Are you serious? Because he trusted me in my judgment. In fact, I was a consultant for that company. I was like, no, dude, you can never do that again. Don't ever do that again. That was a terrible analogy to use. He's like, well, I didn't know. He just built this amazing military machine. So sometimes people are just ignorant about it. Yeah, I mean, see your eyes, Michael. So go ahead, chime in with that.
I'm gonna try to tie this to bigger topics, because if you look at all the things that have been in the news, so Deshaun Jackson, and I think all of us read his piece. I think most people did. Ice Cube, his comments, Nick Cannon and his exchange with Professor Griff. Although I was a big Public Enemy fan myself in college, but that exchange, all of them revolve around very common themes that have been well trod, at least in the more worldly and educated circles, as everyone knows this is BS. And yet these are people with voices and platforms, and it's all the same stuff. The Rothschilds and how they still perhaps are shadowy controlling all of our money in the banks. I'm not familiar with the whole Black Hebrews thing, and somehow being Jewish and the existence of the Jews somehow is anti-Black, and the relationship between Black people viewing themselves as Israelites, or I don't understand it. I wasn't exposed to it, so I'm going to say that's my educational deficit. But all these things just are rooted in a lack of worldliness and a lack of just basic understanding of history and Jewish history and world history. To not know enough about Hitler's track record. I mean, I could understand even making the Stalin, who killed even more people than Hitler and was a horrible anti-Semite. Some people just don't have the same reaction when you talk about Stalin. So I can, because it just isn't as well known.
Right.
But it's just rooted in a lack of sophistication, a lack of education, and ignorance. And how come these things, in order to develop like black empowerment sort of feeling about Black people, why does it have to include anything about Jewish oppression or what Jews are doing? That's what I'm trying to understand, and how those two things relate.
Yeah, I think I've heard it said that if someone else has to be on their knees for you to feel tall, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it, but I've not delved into the Black Israelites. I know that. So in a moment of levity, which y'all are learning, I try to do sometimes. It's real. I just may not be funny. But a lot of Black people want to take credit for being the original Asiatic man, as well as the original Hebrew and the original man on earth, because you can't get the recessive gene from the dominant gene. And so being pigmentation, you hear that, and they trope it out, right? I'm using her word to be funny with that. But so I don't know about that either, but I do believe it's irresponsible for someone like Deshaun Jackson or Ice Cube to continue to promote things that are sort of urban legend because they hear it. Now, sorry guys, but more levity. And I apologize, Michael. You can educate me if it's not funny, but we're open like that here. I like LeBron James. I almost thought it was a compliment. Like if people were like, "Hey, I want to get that Black money," like Black people got it. Hey, Black folks own all the real estate. I'd be like, right on. So like, I don't know. How do you feel about that? And then go to Elisa.
I remember it. Most of us in the Jewish community weren't really bothered by it because of, once again, I think how it was delivered. I think the spirit in the delivery. I think that he very quickly, made it clear that it was meant in one way. So his whole thing didn't bother most of us in any real way that caused any just topic of discussion. Not at all like the way the Deshaun Jackson case, for instance, has.
Did you believe LeBron?
100%. I believe it was totally sincere.
Gotcha. Elisa.
You know what? I think I feel like when you're a part of a group that feels smothered or disrespected by the majority, I think it's easy to make yourself feel better by putting other people down. My mom would always say, "Who are you trying to convince?" And I think sometimes you're trying to convince yourself. I grew up listening to Wu-Tang. And so the Asiatic man, I can go through verse on Wu-Tang records with that. And so, but I think for me, that was the same thing. If someone would have said to me to a Jay and Kenny, I don't know, what was that remark? The Jew 'em down. I would have thought that was a good thing because I thought you were supposed to bargain and haggle. I would have thought that was a good thing. But I would have known better than to use that in a mixed company group, especially with someone who I felt had a lower exposure to the world than I did. I think at the end of the day, as a society, we're going to have to come up with a code of conduct. And we're going to have to say, you don't get to say this, this, and this. Jay-Z in 444, he made in Dumbo, he makes a comment about Jewish people in that. It's not disrespectful. You wonder why Jewish people have money. Here, I'm going to give you the game for $9.99 is what he says. It wasn't like, oh, because Jewish people are stealing it from us. It's because they built the community and they work together as a community. And so I think there's ways to talk about other groups without making it sound like World War III is going to start because you realize that this group stole your place. And I think that's what with Deshaun Jackson quoting something that you can't even verify was said by Hitler. It just goes and makes you wonder, like, what was the point of saying that? Who were you trying to feed with that information?
My mother also used to say, "Who did you convince?" Maybe, they came from the same tribe somehow.
They might have.
But I want to reiterate that because a person is a celebrity, a 33-year-old football player who's been, I mean, I've followed Deshaun a little bit. I won't pretend to know what I don't know. And I've often defended and stood up for these young athletes who got too much money too soon. I think it should be put away from them. And I would say, God forbid, everything I said at 21 or 24 was on the news and you got to read it, right? So that's true. But on the other hand, I think I don't take him that seriously from a intellectual and political standpoint, but unfortunately he has a stage.
Right.
So Jay Sharif.
I mean, you know, in terms of the celebrities, it's like, unfortunately, they're in the spotlight. They do have a lot of influence, and they do therefore have the responsibility to conduct themselves in a certain manner. I think they don't have the luxury of irresponsible comments or irresponsible tweets. And so, you know, it's unfortunate that he doesn't understand that. But I think you're being too gracious, right? Because I feel like if we're talking about Mussolini, it's one thing. Maybe you don't know the history of Mussolini. But how do you not know who Adolf Hitler was? You know, how did you actually get through high school and college and not have a clue as to the destruction that this man caused, right? Yeah. Why would you want to reference anything about him? And so that's concerning to me. But, you know, as I said, I think the way that I would sometimes hear things, I very much got the impression that sometimes when people talked about the Jewish culture and talked about the things that they owned, there was some contempt behind that. Like somehow they got what they got by exploiting others. And so that's why I think there's that dichotomy, right, in the reference. On the one hand, it could be something complimentary, like, you know, they're very fiscally responsible. I think one thing that the Jewish community is credited for is being very unified, right, which is something the Black community is still working on. Part of why the Jewish community is successful is because they can come together and support one another. And that's like almost exponential, their impact, right? But I think sometimes those references to what they own and the power that they have are not necessarily complimentary, but they are actually kind of disparaging, because the suggestion is that they got this on the backs of other people. Yes. And I think too that sometimes there are people who are just very envious and resentful. And so those comments, I think they're not always complimentary. Sometimes they are, but I think it depends on the context. And I think when those are made, you have to think about how it could be received.
Yeah, I don't believe that they're always complimentary by any stretch of the imagination. I was specifically honing in on LeBron James and adding some levity, but serious about LeBron James. I absolutely concur that when people say that, probably more times than not, they're trying to say that they believe Jewish people are greedy and all about money, you know, the stupid jokes about dropping a penny, that crazy stuff. I think that's what they mean. I agree with you. As I impart personal experience here, there was a guy that I didn't know, right, with my Northeastern experience, who was being anti-Semitic, and then someone else told me what he meant by it, and I didn't even know. It was another project here in Knoxville, and this guy kept referring to my friend Ethan, and he kept going, "The banker, you mean the banker? Where's the banker? You know, where's the banker today?" And I was like, "He's not a banker, what are you talking about?" And then later someone else said, he's trying to be anti-Semitic because Ethan's Jewish. And I had no idea. I was like, dude, he's not a banker. What are you saying, right?
Yeah.
So have you ever heard that one as an anti-Semitic thing, Michael?
No, I have not. But, you know, let's take a look at how these words are being used and how it relates to overt anti-Semitism that has really changed in the last 5 years from what I saw growing up. Meaning, what we're talking about is that words have meaning and words have power. The Black community certainly has experienced that over a long enough time, that when people get used to referring to people a certain way, it installs mindsets and thinking that become just part of how people who are insulated, and once again, lack of relationships. You're describing guys who don't have relationships with Jewish people. So all they have are the thoughts and the words and the things that they're exposed to, and that's it. And just like a lot of white America doesn't have meaningful, deep relationships with African Americans where they can filter the things and the thoughts and the words and the little, you know, those microaggressions that we talked about, Jay Shree, right? Those that they have no way to filter that through anything real. So what happens is you just get a buildup of these images. And so then when something comes into your sphere, like Deshaun Jackson's, that article, that's a BS article, by the way, that has been attributed to many different writers, by the way. I've seen that piece many times. Well, it resonates with this sort of body of thinking and words that he's always heard referring to it. So it just made sense to him at the time because of his lack of exposure and his lack of worldliness.
Yeah.
And it goes in all directions. We see it not only with Jews, but we've been seeing it in Black America for generations. But Jewish people, only very recently, we're seeing overt expressions of it that we are not used to seeing in this country. I don't have to go chapter and verse, but San Diego, Pittsburgh, the guys in Charlottesville, I mean, the guys in the torches were marching. They were saying, I think they were chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." I know that
They were
not thrilled about Black people either, but that's what they were chanting. So this stuff is clearly very present under the surface. And like you mentioned last time, Kenny, that the leadership in the country seems to have opened a window and made it more okay for this stuff to boil up. But we're experiencing levels of violence and direct attacks that even my parents never remember experiencing in this country.
Yeah.
Directly.
So I want to express again that in our attempt, or my attempt, to not necessarily dismiss Deshaun Jackson, I absolutely believe his comments were stupid, ignorant, and immature at best.
For sure.
But it's just that he has a platform. I mean, I don't take him any more seriously than some guy in the aisle at Kroger who says something stupid. But he has a platform. And there's no rule that says because a guy plays in the NFL and he can run fast and catch the deep ball that we ought to listen to him. I mean, he's an idiot, right? I mean, he's a 33-year-old man and he's an idiot. I just said it. Lisa, what do you got?
You know what? I think that's the poison, though. When you have a platform and you aren't exposed to enough, because if you're not exposed to Jewish people and then you hear someone that you think is an idol because he got out of his circumstances, I believe he was from LA, I think he was from Crenshaw, he got out of his element, he's making it, he's got a platform, he's got millions of followers. When you say those comments, though, because words do have power, the little kids that you hear that hear you and don't know any Jewish people, and they might have been to the Holocaust Museum, but they don't know Jewish people. They don't sit down and break bread with them. They don't have a connection with them. That's when despise starts to grow, because it makes it look as though it's okay to identify a group of people and feel negatively about them. So I think when the power comes with your platform, it's important, and he's come back and apologized. And then Jackson, another Jackson came up, and he was like, "No, I didn't mean to defend him." It's important that we have those apology videos so that their followers can then see, wait a minute, like this is how I misspoke or misstepped. But then it goes back to education. When you were saying that you didn't think somebody could honestly think Hitler was bad, you have to understand that these are the kids that are being educated by the same system that are teaching them that Confederate generals were American heroes. So like, we like to make it seem like it wasn't that bad of a situation. So I could see someone thinking Hitler wasn't that bad, like he was just trying to protect his own. And so it's like, no, he was a murderer. And so I think, though, that's where we've got to, when you have this platform and you abuse it, even if it's for lack of knowledge or immaturity, what are the repercussions across the board? Anytime anyone uses their platform in celebrity, do we boycott them?
We lost Elisa's voice there. So, Jay Cherie, what do you want to add here?
You know, I think when it comes to like the historical interpretation of Hitler, I think that in this country, we pretty much teach kids that Hitler was awful, right? Because we have nothing to lose by doing so. Like, we don't want to teach about Andrew Jackson and the truth about him because that's America. But I think that we do teach he was awful. And so I find it hard to imagine that people got through at least 12 years of school and never heard that he was responsible for the death of millions of Jewish people. But I mean, you know, we can't assume that people all have the same understanding.
Yeah.
I think honestly, what I'm kind of more interested in understanding and talking about is when we see, as Black people, when we see people like Deshaun Jackson making such comments or tweets like that, are we speaking up, right? Are we speaking up even on our social media pages, right? Because like if Trump makes some ignorant comment, which he often does, he's wont to do, right? Every now and again, like I'll find the time because he does it like every day. But every now and again, there's something that's just so horrific that I'm like, I got to say something about it on my Facebook page, right? Are we doing the same thing with people like Deshaun Jackson? And the reason I ask that is that, you know, after the death of George Floyd, what I saw a lot of on social media, and I understood it, were my Facebook friends who were of color saying, hey, where are my white friends, right? I'm not hearing from my white friends. Why is no one speaking up? And we expected that from the white community, right? So, I mean, of course, Deshaun's comments weren't, no one died directly as a result of that. But we want people to speak up on our behalf, right? When there are overtly racist things being done, said, what have you. Is the Black community going to do the same for the Jewish community?
So at the top of our show today, I said there can be two things in the same place. And I'll tell you what I meant. I'll repeat it. I agree. First of all, to your direct question, I think the answer is for many of us, yes. I can't say for how many, but if I know about it, I absolutely speak up about it. I also feel a responsibility as a non-celebrity, but even being a person who gets some level of respect in my community where I live. I mean, I don't have to watch myself because I don't feel those ways about other people. So I don't have to watch what I say, but I do make sure that I impart openly and in front of people when I hear something. And definitely all of their lives, I've been that way with my children. Like, hey, did you hear that? That was not okay, kind of thing. So overall, in terms of, you know, being certainly openly against any of that nonsense that a guy like Deshaun Jackson is spouting, I'm for it. But the other part about this article that I also think exists, I think she's pushing too hard. And what I mean is, you know, when she writes this stuff about African-American, this doesn't mean that her family or other African-American families are more or less anti-Semitic than others in America. I don't buy that nonsense. African-Americans are definitely less anti-Semitic than white people.
Yes.
Because I don't ever hear Black people saying anti-Semitic stuff. Maybe I live in the wrong place, but I just don't. It's not true. And so this idea that like it should be equal in America is not true. I'm not saying competing. Like back in the day, I used to hear this, like at Penn, these different views. Like if someone would talk about the Holocaust and they say 5 million, 6 million people murdered in the Holocaust, then someone Black who might want to, in this intellectual argument, want to go, well, yeah, but whatever, there's 100 million Black skeletons at the bottom. So compare and contrast, like, you know, we got it worse.
Right.
So I'm not talking about that. But what I'm saying is in America, in the United States, this is our Holocaust. So for this woman to think that as a Black man, I should believe that anti-Semitism in the United States is equivalent with racist against Black people, I don't believe that.
Can I ask a question? Oh, this is to
Sure.
build on that, and this is something that I just wondered about, is that does the Black community in general, oh, I'm frozen now, hold on.
Yeah.
Does the Black community in general lump or categorize the Jewish community as just another part of the white community? I mean, I know Jewish people feel themselves very strongly that they are not, or don't want to be identified with how the Black community usually thinks about white America. We feel separate from them. We feel different from them. And however, and once again, this is one of those areas we talked about blind spots. I've had to explain to many Jewish people in my community, I agree with you, but the simple fact exists that if you do this and you do this, most of white America doesn't know you're Jewish anymore.
Right.
Right.
And so I think that we lose sight of that as a Jewish community because we're used to seeing that we feel way more identified with the Black community because of our shared experiences historically than WASP America.
And back in the day, people like Bernie Sanders and black leaders had a great relationship. I was gonna go over to Elisa next, but since Michael said, "How does the black community feel about it?"
Yeah.
I'm gonna come in real quick and then get to Jason. And so,
I don't
I
want that. I
shared
don't
with you
want it
guys
next.
once, and I'll say it real fast.
Yeah, go
When I
for
was
it.
in high school, I openly asked in a classroom setting in my high school. I raised my hand like, "Excuse me," like we were going over some stuff about anti-Semitism, and I just was like, "Excuse me, he's white. What's the difference? I'm just his boy from North Carolina, right?" And that was my experience. Very different from Jay Cherise. Go ahead, Jay Cherise.
Mine was the same. I mean, I think that the Black community looks at Jewish community, most of whom are white, as part of white America. It's just that your faith is somewhat different than the predominant Christian faith. And therefore, I think that the Jewish community still will get the same amount of angst from the Black community, right? But I think that then you have that extra part of whatever the stereotype is about Jewish people that also comes into it.
Yes. What do you got, Elisa?
So, real quick back to education, because I know I froze again. You got people who today don't think that many people died in the Holocaust. So our education system's not doing a good job. But on that fact, on the other thing, I will tell you that white America that I know, and I've got, I lived around the world. They don't see Jewish people as white. They don't claim Jewish people as white. And so I think that's an odd place for American Jewish people to be. Like, you're definitely skin tone wise, you're definitely white. Heritage, though, you don't share the same heritage white Americans share, unless you did what you did, Michael, take off the glasses, take off the yarmulke, and assimilate. And because it's safer. It was safer if you were a Jewish person here, it was safer to participate in that than have it turned towards you. And so I could see that as why some black people may consider Jewish people just white, because it's easier to blend in. You can't blend in unless you're white passing. You can't blend in into white society. But Jewish people have that luxury of being able to blend in.
Sure.
So I think it's just I think we have to check how we're going to treat each other.
And I think that that's also sometimes when Black people feel like Jewish people may not understand their plight, because I think some of us feel like you can always pass. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We cannot pretend we're not Black, right? Most of us look Black and we can't play it off. But if you were ever in such a situation where, not that you'd ever want to deny your faith, right? But if you felt that you needed to avoid some significant conflict or challenge or assault, you could pass for just an American person who's not necessarily Jewish. And so that makes it like, we can't ever escape what we are. If we wanted to, we can't. We have to just handle whatever comes our way because of it.
I mean, my grandparents are fond of telling me stories. When they were growing up, or my great grandparents, they would often get a job somewhere in, they all went through Ellis Island and then, dispersed down through New York and the East Coast. And their jobs would last a week because they were raised in homes where if you didn't show up on Saturday, you were fired. And so, and that was what prompted their push to, okay, well, clearly my kids, to survive in America, cannot be raised this way in the way that we raised our kids in the old country. Now, obviously, the world has changed quite a bit. Orthodox Jewish communities in this country are easy to find, and we're everywhere. But there was, they changed their last names to sound less Jewish. They worked on Saturdays, and you're right. They were able to. Jewish families could make the conscious decision to assimilate their kids in a way that Black families cannot make that the same decision. And I think that we don't understand that, but yet we still feel very injured, I think, when we're lumped together with the rest of white America by.
Why is that? What do you want? If you had to say to an audience listening to you, which you're about to do,
okay,
and you may not necessarily be speaking for yourself, but you can say you are, but
right.
You may be speaking for your friends or some of your family. Why is it so important to not be mistaken as a regular white person who's not Jewish in this country?
There is a there's an unbroken chain of transmission going back 3,000 years in the Jewish people that every Jewish kid, no matter how irreligious, can still tell you pretty much chapter and verse what happened, to their ancestors 25 generations ago. And we have, rituals and traditions that have brought us forward, and we feel very connected all the way back. And we feel that our experience is so different than that of majority white America that it's very hard for us to accept being just lumped in with that in the same way. Now, if you also travel to other parts of the world, if you travel to the Middle East, which I have the privilege of doing regularly, there are genetically Jewish people of all colors. There is an entire Jewish community in Ethiopia that was airlifted to Israel. They are genetically Jewish in every way.
Yep.
They have traditions going back thousands of years that connect them directly to the diaspora or the disbursement of Jews out of Israel. I mean, it's phenomenal. And yes, we could talk about how there's still some prejudice in Israel society, but there are generals in the army who are of the Ethiopian descent. There are Jews feel connected to that and Israel and the land and all those people in a way that makes us feel, how can we be claimed to be part of the same white community that the African American community feels oppressed by? And I think that's what drove a lot of our involvement in the civil rights movement in the 60s. We felt that connection.
So let me add this, and let's talk about this a little bit, or something else if you want, but either Lisa or Jay chime in after. But I experienced, when I was introduced to the speaking and writing of Louis Farrakhan in college, and attending the University of Pennsylvania, which we know is made up of a high percentage of Jewish students. The general consensus among those Jewish students was that he was anti-Semitic. And I didn't know, again, go with this country boy from North Carolina, boarding school, secluded town of 1,000 people in North Carolina. So upon further investigation by myself, what I found was, and I didn't hear 1,000 speeches. I don't know if I had to guess, 10, 20. I'm going to tell you the message I heard. I heard that he admired Jews because they stuck together and they understood that heritage that you're talking about. And they said, marry a good Jewish boy, marry a good Jewish man, and let the money go around in the Jewish community and build your race for respect. Because even if people are anti-Semitic and they don't like you, they're going to have to respect you because you're going to have that economic power. That was the message I heard from Louis Farrakhan. Maybe I didn't get deep enough to hear the anti-Semitic stuff, and I know there's been a lot of inflamed stuff. So I want to be clear that I'm not here saying that he's not or trying to take that position, but I'm telling you, me and this brain and what I heard him emphatically saying to black people almost this in summary: you ought to act more like Jews. That's what I heard.
But I can tell you that, granted, we all get filtered information. The stuff and the video and the speeches that I was exposed to from him were only, like you said, I wasn't exposed to any of his positive messages. I just searched that out on my own. And when I did, I found an extraordinary amount of things that had nothing to do with denigrating anybody, but empowering the black community. Yeah. That's absolutely true. However, what I was exposed to was pretty alarming and pretty specific and pretty, I'm going to say bordering on violently anti-Semitic in the rhetoric that he used. And from him.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
You know what?
You and I'll have to exchange, and you can share some of that with me. Yes. Go ahead, Elisa.
You know what? You know what, Kenny? I kind of understand exactly what you mean. If you, like, the term Karen right now is a derogatory term for white women. There's not a person on the earth that could call me Karen and I would have my feelings hurt. I can go and listen to information, Kenny, like you were talking about Farrakhan. I can go and listen to information, and I'm able to, because I got the same message from you that you did, Kenny. It was that I'm pretty sure he thinks that they got their stuff together. But I also did, Michael, pull the parts that was like, oh, that's not cool. Like, what are we playing here? Do we like them or do we not like them? And I think when your message for people who, Kenny, like us, who can just, we can hear the positive stuff that people are saying, that's a blessing for us. But there's those people who can't hear that part, and they only hear we don't like them, and they're not supposed to be part of us. And that's with any group spewing any type of hatred towards another group, because there's power in numbers. And so if I get enough people that interpret his words as violence towards Jewish people, then we can have an uprising against Jewish people. If there's enough people that think
That's right.
you know, and so that's where, if you're not clear, and when you use your platform, any platform, and you don't, like Kenny, you've repeatedly said, hey, this is not how I feel, I'm just giving information on this. This is, or I understand both things. You have to constantly say that, so that you can't get a snippet out and plant it to,
Right,
oh,
right.
I don't like, we don't like
Well,
the Jewish people.
So maybe here's the deal. Maybe I'm guilty of this, Jay. Just like, actually, that's not true. I'm not even close to that. But I'm just trying to be kind of humble with this.
Yeah.
Like some of those, because I'm not I'm not racist, but like some of those people who vote for Trump that are not racist and don't hear the dog whistles, and we say, how can you not hear that dog whistle?
Right.
Maybe when I was 21 and 22 and 20, and I was going through this experience of Black empowerment and Black nationalism and wanting to hear the positive things, I didn't hear the dog whistles for people who are anti-Semitic. Maybe I didn't hear that, because what I was listening for was the Black empowerment. And I heard the stuff that really sounded like that he thought Jews had their stuff together and we ought to be more like them. And maybe I just missed the dog whistle, because, as Michael would call it, maybe it was a blind spot for me.
I have to agree. I think back to college, and there were, I think my internet's crazy. There were a number of times when we would have, the Black Student League would have meetings, or there'd be some presentation or something. It would mention Minister Farrakhan, and we'd hear about the work he was doing. And I didn't really identify him as being anti-Semitic. And so I had to really go back and check, because I'm like, did I just miss it? But I'm like, I couldn't have imagined it. All of these people are saying that he's made these anti-Semitic comments. So, I went and I did some research, and I'm going to read this to you. And this is from 2018, right? An address that he gave in Chicago. And so these are the kinds of things he was saying. White Jews will blackmail America. They will extort America. Their plan for world domination won't work if the Negroes know who they are. The white citizens of America will be terrified to know that all this time they've been mistreating and discriminating and lynching the children of Israel. So I'm sorry, that's the Deshaun Jackson one. My bad. I'm gonna tell you what's fair.
I was like, he quoted him perfectly.
I'm looking at the wrong place on my phone. He says, the powerful Jews are my enemy. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. He says, white folks are going down, and Satan is going down by God's grace. Farrakhan has pulled the cover off of that satanic Jew, and I'm here to say your time is up. Your world is through. He
said, pulled the cover off of that satanic Jew.
Mm-hmm. He goes
There's
on
no
to
other
say
way to interpret that.
Right. That the Jews have a grip on the media and Hollywood, and how the Jews are responsible for all of this filth and degenerate behavior that Hollywood is putting out, turning men into women and women into men. So, that was in one address, and that wasn't even the whole address, right? And so I think it's things like that we weren't hearing as college students, because maybe we were into like, we want to see our community come together and grow and prosper. But this is more than a dog whistle, because I am not a fan of Trump, but he didn't say anything like this in his July 4th speech about Black people.
Right.
He said some things we understood what he
Jay,
meant.
can I ask a
There were
question?
inferences to be made, but this wasn't what he did.
Jay, can I ask a question? Because the problem with the Jewish community has with Farrakhan is that the tropes, the language, and the way he speaks is 180 degrees different when he is talking to his people inside of his institutions versus when he speaks publicly, where the media and where he has, you know, a college campus, something else, you know, like the clip I sent you, Kenny, from the Donahue show.
Yeah.
Didn't sound
Yeah.
anything like that. But all of the stuff, Jay, that I hear is mostly when he's talking to his own organization, his own people at rallies, at Founders Day. I understand it's a big deal for the NOI in Chicago. And this stuff, and not just from him, but his lieutenants, the people that work for him, who are all speaking, all come out with the same thing. And I think that's what scares and bothers the Jewish community, how very different languages. So do you know where that was that an internal talk he was giving to his people kind of thing?
So then maybe he's coming out and gaslighting us to make people who heard him like me hear what I heard, right? And then he goes back in and he does the stuff like what Jay just said.
Yeah, or he just feels comfortable in his settings. He can really speak how he really feels and what he really thinks and what he wants the people that follow him and revere him, which they do, to catch on to.
Yeah, I mean, so I would imagine that, you know, when it comes to Minister Farrakhan, the Jewish community must feel about him like we feel about people from the alt-right, right? Because we know that those extreme conversations are going on. We know they go on, and they aren't making them completely public yet. The things that they probably say within their internal group, but we know that there's nothing flattering being said about us, and we very much believe that a lot of the talk is very threatening and violent, and that these are people who would seek to destroy us if they could. And I mean, and that's the only analogy I can make, that it must feel that way for Jewish people when it comes to what Farrakhan has to say.
Jay gets to be a Jewish voice now. You got your Jewish card from Michael. He's going to give it to you right now.
Good. So, what do you got, Elisa?
You know what? I think this all goes back to my main verse, education, because I think we have to expose our children to so much more. We have to. Farrakhan's voice is very smooth. He can speak really well. I enjoy listening to Farrakhan speak, his voice, but then he'll say stuff and I'm like, that's not cool. But we have to be able to listen, and we have to be able to think for ourselves and have enough accurate historic content to know that this is the way that we've always solved our issues. We've divided ourselves. I'm frozen. We've divided ourselves, and when we divide ourselves in any little subgroup, those the ones with the majority get to have more power, and they try to destroy everybody else. And we've got to figure out a way
to come together. And that's going to be one of our shows at some point, where Michael introduced the book to me. The authors were Cornel West and
Michael Lerner.
See, I remember the black guy. But very seriously, I'm very much aware of the relationship between Jews and blacks in America in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, particularly in the 50s and 60s. And we need to think about how to go about that. And part of the start is, now that we do have this social media platform, responding to the question that you asked earlier, Jay Cherie, like when we were dealing with a lot of the stuff earlier, and we still do, and we say, well, where are our white friends? Are they speaking out, or are they just being complicit? I'm proud to say that I speak out, and it sounds like you do too. And I think, and I hope that if people listen to us here, they will understand that they should speak out, because the two things that I've said to white friends over the last, 3-4 months is, and I said it on another show, but it's okay to repeat, is two things. One, when you hear something that's not right, you have to speak up and not be complicit. It's sort of like my mother told me this one. Be careful of doing this, nodding your head when people are speaking. Be clear that you don't agree if you don't agree, because then they'll think you're co-signing, just to sort of avoid controversy. And the other thing is, believe people when they say it. So I think that we have to also remember that as a minority population who've been oppressed in this country, that when we hear people speaking out and saying things that are anti-Semitic, we need to say something. I'm going to give you a place that I was guilty recently. I was in the midst of working on closing a real estate deal. And the realtor who was talking, and I'm embarrassed, but I'm admitting it, but I'm going to grow from this. I didn't say anything because I was more concerned with just getting through the deal, and I should have. But I'm dealing with the guy who owns the building and the realtor in front of me, both white men. The realtor said something about, I asked about the condition of the roof because he said there were a bunch of Mexicans out there earlier, and the way they were moving around, they looked like little monkeys. And I just thought, oh my God, did he just say look like little monkeys? So I know that if he were talking to a Mexican guy and there were some black people working, he'd have said they look like little apes or something. But I was just concerned with getting out of there and getting my deal done. Also because I was wearing a mask when we met at a Panera Bread and it was a month ago and I really didn't want to be out. But it's no excuse. I should have said something. So I'm checking myself.
There's a saying by, I think it's Edmund Burke, and it says, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. All right. And that's exactly it. You know, you have the crazy people and the crazy leaders. But really things go on and go wrong because people stand back and they say nothing, do nothing for whatever reason. And then things just escalate. And I think that probably was very true as Hitler started to overtake Germany, right? Because it was like things were happening that people saw and they didn't speak up. And, you know, what's that poem? First they came for the socialists, was that it?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for the gypsies, and I wasn't a gypsy, so I didn't say anything. And they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a gypsy.
Labor unionists, right?
And then when they came for me, there was no one, right?
Yep.
Right. That's right. That's right.
I just want to add though to the whole the Hitler narrative, and maybe it was because I was into sports, but one of the most inspirational stories I remember hearing growing up, and I remember I was 8 or 9 years old when I learned about Jesse Owens.
Jesse Owens.
I learned about Jesse Owens as, first of all, I don't think America was a very black-friendly place in 1936. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Jesse Owens got a lot of love in his own country, and yet he still chose to think about the courage that he had to get on that team and to go over to Berlin, to a place where he was considered even more subhuman than he was considered at home, and representing America and beating the snot out of all of those Aryan motherfuckers and running them into the ground. And I remember reading, I got one of these little books in 4th grade about it, and I read it 5 times. I thought, like, who wouldn't love this? I mean, spitting in Hitler's face in his own country for America. Jesse Owens is a Jewish hero. Everyone should think Jesse Owens is a Jewish hero. You know?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I remember that story and thinking, did he know that he would get out of there alive? Like, you know, would Hitler really do something if he won, right? I remember thinking that. So let's, this has been a good show. Let's go around. Any parting comments? Elisa, Jay Cherie, and then Michael, and we'll get out.
I think, and to wrap this one up, we've got to expose ourselves better, and we've got to expect more. And like you were saying, Kenny and Jay, you've got to speak up. You've got to make a decision to speak up, even if it sounds wrong and they need to correct you that you're wrong, that they were wrong. Like, even if you think you misheard something, say, wait a minute, and let them explain themselves clearly so that maybe the next time the people don't say something that could be transcribed into hatred, because I think that's what we've got to get away from. We've got to figure out a way to stop communicating with hateful comments. Jay Cherie.
And I think we, you know, it's so easy to stereotype. We talk about stereotypes and we don't want it done to us. But sometimes it's just so easy to do it. You don't even realize that you're doing it. And I think that we have to be more thoughtful in our comments when it comes to that. And if we want to point out something wonderful about another group, then we need to just come out and say what that is. Like, let's just say the Jewish community is great for their unity, and they can put their money together and they can make some wonderful things happen. As opposed to like the kind of common cliches, which often can be misconstrued as being disrespectful. I think we have to be more aware of that, because as Black people, we certainly don't like to be on the receiving end of those comments. People might think it's nice to say that we can dance really well or we play basketball really well. Typically, we're not really excited to hear that kind of compliment, right? So we have to be mindful when we make such comments about other groups.
Well, I think that's a funny stereotype, because one of the things that annoys me a lot, here I go with my levity, is all the Black dudes that think they can play basketball because they're Black and they can't.
I hated those guys, by the way.
Who buy into that stereotype. What's up, Michael?
I hated those guys at Gimbal.
Michael,
like,
you hated them because they couldn't play and they'd still get picked before you.
Correct.
That's why you didn't like it.
I took it very personally, and I went after them like with blood in my on my mind every game when that happened. I took it personally, actually.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, let's roll out with this one. I hope that other people will be able to do some self-analysis and check themselves, just like I was able to share with you guys, checking myself where I should have spoken up. And the next time I'm with that guy, if he says something like that, because I will be with him again, we haven't closed yet, I will be sure to check him.
Amen. Thank you.
Good.
All right.
We hope to hear about that check, Kenny.
Yeah.
All right. If he says something.
I know he might not. He might have got your eyes in the meeting and was like, wrong.
He did. So, all right. It's been a good one.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Looking forward to
Sunday
Sunday.
night. All right. Bye.